Santee Cooper is charging area homeowners as much as $102 in hidden fees per month, which are added to their H.O.A. dues. This is for light poles.
And our point is this, that Santee Cooper has been successful in keeping this below the radar. A little history in this regard. When a community is first being developed by a developer, Santee Cooper approaches that developer and says, have we got a deal for you? Says, you don't have to finance hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in your outdoor lighting system. We'll pay for that. We'll do that for you. We'll install the lights that you want. You can select from this array of choices. And then when you do that, we'll just lease them back to you. Then in a year or two, or whenever you turn this over to a duly elected HOA, then they will assume this contract for you, and you can walk away from this not ever having had to front the money. To which they say, where do I sign? And every HOA within the Santee Cooper domain has done that. So now a brand new HOA board that's newly elected comes on. They take over, they look at the budgets. They see that ever since the community was established, they've had X amount for lease and X amount for electricity costs. And they said, whoa, this looks excessive, to which the developer and Santee Cooper will say, oh, that's the way it is for every community. That's just the way it is. And you notice it's a steady thing and everybody else is doing it, so press on and deal with your other more urgent matters.
We're here today with...
My name is Bob Sweet, and I live in Plantation Lakes here in Carolina Forest.
Bob, why are we here today?
We're here to discuss a very strong inequitable arrangement between Santee Cooper and our POA here, but it not only applies to us, but to every POA that's within the domain that Santee Cooper owns, or that they oversee and provide electricity for.
And POAs are commonly known as HOAs?
HOAs, yes. Homeowners Association, in our case, it's a Property Owners Association. So the more common term is a HOA. Our concern is that for several years now, we've been attempting to contact Santee Cooper and say, look, the rates that you're charging us to lease these street lights and poles seems to be exorbitant. Can't we work out something to adjust this? And we had been told repeatedly, no, the arrangement that we have with you, where you are leasing the lights and poles from us, is what we're doing for every HOA that we oversee. And that's just the way it is. To which we said, well, surely this is an exorbitant rate. We note that we're only paying $1,100 a month for the electricity. That's a rate that we think is quite acceptable, and we've agreed to pay that. But to pay 7 times that to lease the poles at $7,700 a month just doesn't make sense. And furthermore, isn't there some way for us to adjust that? To which they said, well, there's really only 3 options that you have. One is to continue and perpetuate this arrangement that you have, since you've met your initial obligation of 5 years of leasing with us. Or the other thing, now that you've met that initial obligation, you can ask us to come remove all of those perfectly good poles. Then you'll have to go purchase other poles. That would cost us around $700,000 to do that. The third option, they say, is if you really feel it's an overcharge to pay that much in lease costs, we can reduce that at least a little bit if you have us come and pull those poles out and replace them with less expensive poles. That will lower the lease costs. But oh yes, every time we put those poles in, you will incur a new 5 or 7 year contract with us, and we're only going to guarantee that we'll replace 50 of those poles a year. That would take 5 years to replace those poles. We would then have a total of an extended 10 years of contract with them where we would be obligated to continue this. To which we said, wait a minute, over the last 15, 16 years, we paid $1.4 million for this lighting system that only cost $718,000 to begin with. We paid twice that. Surely we can be able to have a transfer of ownership. We would like to assume that and assume the obligation of owning that and then maintaining that. To which they ultimately said, you know what, we hear you, but there's this code, the South Carolina code, that says very precisely that any viable asset such as this that we own, we cannot transfer to a community unless there's a full vote of the assembly. in the legislature. That's where we are today.
Who wrote that code, Bob? Who do you think wrote that code?
Well, I'm a realist. Most of my life I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist, and I think in this case it only serves the purposes of the utilities. And so Santee Cooper stands to benefit from the case that there's a roadblock. And although they have a legal contract with the H.O.A, such as ourselves, it's not a viable or an ethical contract, because the only alternatives we have to perpetuating this unfair arrangement is to have them remove poles, and now we incur an obligation of $750,000 to replace our 220 poles or that.
So this code, this ordinance, was written in what body of government?
Well, it was written under the legislature of South Carolina, which controls Santee Cooper. So it's a very in-house arrangement that, to the objective observer, clearly comes across as an unfair practice. Might I add one other thing? In addition to this obstacle to transfer ownership, Santee Cooper has told us that, oh, by the way, if you become the private owner of this outdoor lighting system, then we will have to install meters. We don't have meters right now because we've owned them, and we know what the electrical use is. So you've been paying according to a formula that we paid out. But if it's privately owned, much as we do, and just exactly as we do for every residence that we bring electricity to, or every business, we install a meter. And I said, well, explain more of this. And they said, well, we will need to install 188 of these meters for your 220 poles, and we're going to maintain ownership of those meters. We're going to lease them to you at $25 per meter. You can do the math. That's over $4,000 a month in rent to rent these meters. And then they said, also, you're responsible for bringing in the stanchions and the connection points where these meters will be installed. When we check with an electrical utility firm, they say it'll be about $1,000 per stanchion to do that. There's another $188,000 that Santee Cooper would be trying to burden us with. So for meters that are totally unnecessary, for 17 years, the usage rate of that electricity for these lights has been X amount. It's in the record, and we've been paying a rate that Santee Cooper asks. We're perfectly willing to consider that arrangement. The electrical use will not change the day we accept ownership, but they're telling us that we will have this burden of allowing them to lease them to us for over $4,000 a month and pay $188,000 to install the tent. Those are totally untenable and unfair arrangements. They're further roadblocks that need to be removed.
Currently per month, what is the Plantation Lakes H.O.A paying in the light pole utility bills?
Yes.
What are you currently paying a month?
To pay the energy cost, we're paying $1,100 a month.
And what are you currently paying per month to lease the light pole?
It's $7,700. Interestingly enough, that's exactly 7 times the cost of the energy. And that $7,700, we've done careful evaluation of the monetary impact of our assuming ownership. We know that we can set monies aside to replace the occasional light bulbs that are required. We'll replace them with LED lights, by the way. And then we know we will have to set aside some money to replace an occasional pole. These are 50-year lights that we have and poles.
So and let me ask you this.
We can do all of that. We can do all of that, by the way, for less than $2,000 a month. So instead of paying $7,700, $2,000 or less.
So let me ask you this, because some of our readers don't know. Is Santee Cooper a private company?
Santee Cooper is actually a public company, and it's overseen by an oversight board within the legislature. So unlike other utilities, it is really essentially under the total control of the legislature.
When you say public company, because some of our readers don't know, then who owns Santee Cooper?
Well, ultimately, the people of South Carolina own that. Our representatives are supposed to be representing us to do that. Our position is that they clearly have not done that as they should. But there's a great opportunity now for them to make some things right. And they can, with an appropriately worded bill, they can remedy this so that we can be able to get out from underneath this inequitable arrangement.